The text arrived just before midnight. Do you still keep the red notebook? For a long moment, I stared at my phone. The rain tapped softly against the apartment window. 9 years had passed since I had last heard from him, yet I knew immediately who had sent the message. Only one person knew about that notebook. His name was Ethan Reed. When I was 16, I thought I was in love with him. Back then, I lived in a quiet town called Willow Creek. It sat less than an hour from a large city, but it felt like a different world. There was one high school, one bookstore, one coffee shop, and a park where everyone seemed to know each other. That autumn, a new literature teacher arrived. Most students noticed him on the first day. I noticed him before he even spoke. He carried a stack of books under one arm and looked more like a graduate student than a teacher. He was young, calm, and confident. While other teachers rushed through lessons, he spoke slowly and made every story feel alive. I sat near the window and listened. For the first time, literature felt real. When he talked about novels, it sounded as if the characters were sitting beside us. When he explained poetry, even the quiet students paid attention. I never tried to impress him. At least that was what I told myself. But I always finished my assignments early. I rewrote essays 3 or 4 times before turning them in. Every time he wrote excellent insight or thoughtful work at the top of my paper, I saved it. Soon, those papers filled an entire drawer in my room. Winter arrived. Snow covered the football field behind the school. The town looked peaceful beneath the white sky. My feelings, however, became more complicated. I thought about him far too often. I wondered what books he read after work. I wondered what kind of music he liked. I wondered whether he felt lonely in a small town where most people were twice his age. I never told anyone. Not my parents. Not my friends. Not even myself. Then spring arrived and everything changed. On the final Friday before vacation, he announced that he would be leaving. A university program had offered him a new position. The classroom became silent. I still remember the feeling in my chest. It felt as if someone had quietly removed the floor beneath me. After school, I walked through the park alone. The trees were beginning to bloom, but I barely noticed them. I thought I would never see him again. Time moved forward anyway. It always does. The following year became one of the busiest years of my life. I focused on university applications and entrance exams. I spent evenings studying grammar, literature, and writing. I wanted to become an author someday. That dream was the only thing that made sense. Several months later, I enrolled in a small preparation course held near the train station. The classroom contained only a few students. I arrived early. I opened my notebook. Then the door opened. My heart nearly stopped. Ethan walked into the room. For a second, he looked just as surprised as I felt. Then he smiled. "Good evening, everyone." The rest of the sentence disappeared beneath the sound of my heartbeat. After class, he approached me. "It's good to see you again, Lily." That was all. A simple sentence. Yet I carried it home like a treasure. The next several months passed quickly. The course focused on writing and critical thinking. Because the class was small, students often stayed after lessons to ask questions. Sometimes I stayed too. At first we discussed books. Then we discussed careers. Then we discussed life. The conversations remained appropriate and respectful, but they mattered to me. For the first time, I felt that he saw me as a person rather than simply a student. That feeling changed everything. During the summer, I graduated. A few weeks later, I turned 18. The preparation course ended shortly afterward. By then, our conversations had become longer. We met occasionally at public cafes to discuss university choices and writing projects. My parents knew where I was. Nothing was hidden. Yet every meeting felt important. One evening, while we sat beside the river, he asked a simple question. "What kind of life do you want?" Nobody had ever asked me that before. Most adults wanted grades, plans, or achievements. He wanted an honest answer. So I gave one. I want a life that feels meaningful. He nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The river moved quietly beneath the evening light. That was the first time I realized my feelings had never disappeared. They had simply grown older with me. University began in the city. Everything changed again. New classes. New friends. New responsibilities. For a while, Ethan and I exchanged messages regularly. Then less often. Life became busy. Months became years. I dated other people. I learned difficult lessons. I experienced success and disappointment. Slowly, the image I carried in my heart became softer and less clear. The older I became, the more I understood something important. At 16, I had not loved a real person. I had loved an idea. I had loved kindness. I had loved encouragement. I had loved the way someone made me feel capable of becoming more than I was. There is a difference. It took years to understand it. During my final year at university, I found the red notebook. It sat inside a box beneath old photographs and school papers. Inside were poems, unfinished stories, and pages of private thoughts written by a younger version of myself. I laughed. Then I cried. Not because I missed Ethan. Because I missed the girl who wrote those pages. She believed everything was possible. She believed every feeling would last forever. She believed people remained unchanged. Life eventually taught her otherwise. After graduation, I became a reading instructor at a community education center. The work was rewarding. I watched children discover books for the first time. I watched shy students become confident readers. Sometimes I saw pieces of my younger self in them. Years passed. The notebook remained hidden. Until the night the message arrived. Do you still keep the red notebook? My fingers hovered above the keyboard. Finally, I replied. Yes. His answer came a few minutes later. I thought you might. We exchanged a few messages. Nothing dramatic. Nothing romantic. Just two people catching up after many years. He was visiting the city the following week for a conference. Would I like to meet for coffee? I hesitated. Then I agreed. The cafe stood across from a small park. I arrived early. Old nerves returned unexpectedly. I checked my watch 3 times. Then the door opened. Ethan walked inside. For a moment, I barely recognized him. Age had changed both of us. His hair contained a few strands of gray. Small lines surrounded his eyes. He looked older, wiser, and more tired than the man I remembered. Then I realized something. He was probably thinking exactly the same thing about me. We laughed. The awkwardness disappeared. For 2 hours we talked. About careers. About family. About mistakes. About dreams that succeeded and dreams that failed. The conversation was easy. Comfortable. Honest. Yet something surprised me. The old feelings never returned. Not because he had changed. Not because I had changed. Because the story itself had changed. The chapter was finished. What remained was gratitude. As we prepared to leave, he smiled. You became exactly who I thought you would become. The words caught me off guard. What do you mean? You never stopped writing. I laughed. No. I guess I didn't. Outside, light rain began to fall. For a moment, we stood beneath the cafe awning watching people hurry across the street. Then he pointed toward my bag. The notebook. I nodded. I had brought it with me. He smiled. Keep it. I planned to. Good. We shook hands. Simple. Ordinary. Final. Then we walked in different directions. I expected sadness. Instead, I felt peace. That evening, I returned home and opened the notebook. Inside, between 2 pages, I found a sentence I had written when I was 16. One day I will understand why this happened. I smiled. At last, I did. Some people enter our lives for a season. Not to stay forever. Not to become the ending. But to help us begin. Ethan had given me something valuable long ago. Not romance. Not destiny. Confidence. Because one teacher believed my words mattered, I spent years learning how to use them. Because one teacher encouraged me, I eventually learned to encourage others. Outside, the rain continued falling. I sat by the window and watched the lights shimmer across the wet street. For the first time in many years, I closed the notebook and placed it back on the shelf. Not because I wanted to forget. Because I no longer needed to hold on so tightly. The story would always belong to me. But now it belonged to the past. And the future was waiting. This is my sweet love story. Be honest. If you met your first love again after 10 years, would the feelings come back? Or do we only fall in love with memories? Tell us your answer in the comments.